everyone, welcome to the Beginner's Guide to Table Saws. We're going to go over some important safety tips as well as some tips and tricks to maybe help you on your journey if you're just getting into messing with a table saw or contemplating buying a table saw. Let's get to it. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to set our blade height. This is very important. You don't necessarily need a lot of the blade sticking up. You mainly need it sticking up just above your material that you're going to cut, to where the gullets here in between the teeth are right at the top of the material. That just allows for all those chips that you're creating in that material to be pulled away and cleared out. Okay, what I'm using here is I'm using some Jessam stock guides. Basically what this does is it has a wheel that's at an angle towards the fence. It actually helps pull that material into the fence. You just simply drop the metal part onto your wood and then tighten your screw down, and then you should be at the right height to where it should put just enough pressure downward on it and then pull it against the fence. I know everybody doesn't have these. I'll leave a link in the description to where you can pick these up if you would like to use some. I absolutely love mine. Okay, so another safety feature you need to be aware of and try to use when possible is most of your table saws come with some type of a blade guard. This is what mine is. It simply goes down in here like this. I'll demonstrate in just a second. It actually covers the blade and allows you to hopefully keep your fingers out from away from the blade. As well as this one has overhead dust collection that attaches to it that also helps. Not every one of them have that, but you would still at least get the blade guard. With my table saw, you simply pull the blade up. It's just got one little pin. You pull the whole thing out, pull the riving knife out, and then you simply slide this in and connect it. You can see here how making the cut, there's no dust. Does a really good job, as well as keeping my fingers away from the blade. So another safety feature is actually the riving knife. This is the thing I removed to put in the overhead dust collection and the blade guard. You definitely need a riving knife, and thankfully most of your new modern table saws, they come with one automatically. Some are removable, some are not, but you definitely need one in place. That actually helps prevent kickback, which is one of the biggest causes, or the leading cause, of table saw injuries. Believe it or not, it's not getting cut by the blade, it's actually the piece flying back at you. So your riving knife definitely needs to be installed, and they all install basically the same way. Some you have to pull the throat plate out and make sure it's connected. Others, like mine, you just pull it up and it slides in. It just has a slot right here. Mine slides in like that. I just move my pin, give it a little wiggle, and it locks down in place. Okay, we're going to cut some small strips out of this so I can give you a demonstration as far as what kind of push sticks and everything to use. So I'm going to go ahead and lower my blade down to the correct height. And I just want to make sure that this is just even, or even just below the surface here. That will be perfect. I'm going to lock my blade down, so we are good to go. Okay, one example of a push stick is this one from Bo. I'll leave a link in the description for it. It actually is beneficial to where it has replaceable foam pads on the front of it, where if you do get into the blade, and you will at some point, ripping smaller pieces, you can just actually replace those, and it doesn't affect, it doesn't throw pieces like some of your plastic push sticks. If you'll notice, I don't have one of those up here, and I'm not going to show you one of those. I actually think those can be quite dangerous. I'll actually leave a link in the description to a video that Matt over at 731 Woodworks did, showing how those can actually break apart if they get hit by a blade and potentially harm you. You can also use something as simple as a wooden push stick, or any kind of block or something like that you can push through the blade. This is one that I got from Chris over at A Glimpse Inside. It's just a makers for St. Jude. Okay, here is probably one of my favorite push sticks, so to speak. This is actually the gripper. This is a great tool because it keeps your hand away from the blade and allows you to push all the way through the cut. You just have to make sure that you adjust the inside. Has a little slide that goes back and forth, and you can see it also has feet.
And there's the feet.
Okay, let's talk for just a minute about throat plates and blade choice. So Typically when you get a table saw, it's going to come with just your general throat plate, which has an angled little bevel on the bottom. If you can see that, that just allows you to be able to tilt your saw blade at different angles without having to change your throat plate. Mine's a little dirty. I had this for zero clearance before I got a zero clearance. This is the one that'll typically come with your saw. So this works good for most of your applications, but if you're ever wanting to make sure that you don't get any tear out on the edges, you're going to need a zero clearance, as well as sometimes this will let small pieces, if you're ripping thin strips, actually fall down into the blade and can cause some problems. But this is typically what you get. The first one I would advise anybody to get would be a zero clearance. This is a zero clearance. You can see it's just got enough room for the blade to pass through, and that is all. That keeps anything from tearing out as the blade spins and goes through your material on the other side, as well as it keeps pieces from actually falling down in to this saw blade area. Another one is completely optional. I will show you the blade here in a minute, but it's called a dado stack. This is a dado stack clearance plate. You can see it's obviously wider. If you're going to be using a dado stack to cut dados, rabbits, or anything like that, you definitely are going to have to pick one of these up or make your own or order one online or something. But these are great for that. Okay, let's go over changing your saw blade out for a different saw blade, and then I'll go over a couple of different types of saw blades. First and foremost, you want to absolutely make sure that your saw is unplugged. You don't want to accidentally bump the start button or anything like that, and that would be just a mess. This blade travels at about 5,000 or so RPM. It would be a bad day. So make sure your saw is unplugged, which mine is. You have on most saws a little button right here that's going to actually lock the arbor in place. You're then going to take your wrench that came with the saw, slide it down, and loosen that nut. Once you get it loosened a little bit, you should be able to reach in and just spin it off with your finger. Just keep in mind that this is a pretty tight space, especially if it's a smaller contractor saw, and your arbor is going to be a lot shorter on those. So check with your manufacturer. You may not even be able to use a dado stack, or at least a full dado stack in your saw. With these cabinet saws, you've got a pretty long arbor. You should be able to do that. Just make sure you keep a hold of the nut that's in there. You don't want it to fall down in. Then you're going to have just a little plate that's actually going to keep the saw blade against the back here, and you're simply going to slide your blade off and pull it up. Now, if you'll look right here, if you have some of the saws, I think the Hercules does, and maybe some of the others, you may have to loosen your riving knife and slide it back to be able to get the saw blade to actually come out. Just check with your manufacturer and look at your instructions on that. Okay, so one of the first blades I'm going to go ahead and talk about is the dado stack. Just get it out of the way. So I actually, I use CMT blades. I'll leave a link in the description to get those. And I also use Freud blades. Those have done me very well, and I like them. They're not super expensive either. The cool thing I like about the dado stack from Freud, from CMT, sorry, is it actually has set points to where you know where to put your chipping blades when you're setting up the stack. This is what a chipping blade looks like. This is what you would see as a normal saw blade, so to speak. These are typically about 8 inches, a little bit different than your full-size blade. So you'll always have one of these, and if you'll notice, CMT puts on the bottom, hide my face, right here, it tells you exactly which side it goes on. This is going to be your left side, and this is going to face out. So when you put this on your arbor, you put this in first, and then, if you'll notice, it has these little marks right here. These are actually your setting point for your chipper blades. So whenever you're putting a chipper blade in, obviously it'll go the same direction, but you will place it in that same mark where the set point is. That will keep the carbide teeth from touching each other, and then of course so on and so forth, and you just keep going around, and then it would look like that. If you were just doing this size of a dado, you'd simply put this one on your right side. You would also set this one up on a chip out point here, and you would have your stack set up. And this would be approximately. That's what this comes in handy for. Do not throw this away. If you open it up, you're going to have on pretty much all of your dado stacks, you're going to have a card in here. It's going to tell you in what combination you need to install the chippers to get whatever thickness dado you're looking for. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is what you typically are going to use your table saw for most of the time. You can do other things and do cross cuts, but typically ripping is going to be what you're going to use your table saw for, especially if you have a miter saw for cross cuts. You can use your table saw for cross cuts, and I'll kind of go over that here with a miter gauge in just a few minutes, but what I use is a 24 tooth ripping blade. This is a CMT blade. The difference with this one is than some of your blades is I've actually got flat teeth on this, if I can get it to focus. The tops of these carbide tips are actually completely flat, where a lot of times you will see them alternate back and forth. The reason I use these is it gives me a cleaner cut. Not a big deal if you're doing a through cut, but whenever you're doing like a rabbet on the end of something, or even you doing a small dado without doing a whole dado stack change, this gives you that flat bottom cut, so whenever you're ready to glue up, you can make your rabbet, and then you pretty much, most of the time, you can just glue it up right off the blade. If nothing else, you might have to hit it with a little bit of sandpaper, so it actually works out a little bit better for me. So this is what I use for my ripping. They make a combination blade. I don't actually have one right now. My last one got pretty dull, and I just haven't replaced it. But a combination blade is going to be something, you know, a 40 to 60 tooth blade. You can basically use it for ripping or cross cutting, either one. So, but combination blade, if you're going to pick one blade to put in your table saw, a combination blade is probably going to be your best option if you just got to pick one, because it'll actually do both ripping and cross cutting. Here's another tip when you're putting your blade back in. You do not need to go gorilla on the wrench.
Why do they want an angry gorilla anyway?
It doesn't take very much. Just simply get it snugged up by hand and just give it a nice little hit, just like that. You don't want to torque down. Okay, let's talk about another piece of equipment you can have for your table saw. I think is a good investment. Doesn't necessarily have to be this one, but Bo makes a really good feather board. That's what these are called. These are called feather boards. These allow you to put pressure up against your table saw fence and blade from this side to keep your wood from drifting. If you don't have the stock guides to pull it, this is a really good option. You always want to make sure you put your feather board on the back side of your blade. You never want it up here to put pressure going into your blade. That's going to wind up causing a pinch and could seriously cause some kickback. Always come back here just before you get to your blade. This one here, tighten it down. You want it to just put barely a little bit of pressure on the wood. That way it holds it in place as it slides through, and it will not allow it to come back very easily. Those little fingers will grab right there. So that is a good safety feature to put on your table saw. They don't cost very much, and it's a very good investment. Typically, a good attachment to have, or I guess attachment tool to have with your table saw, is going to be a miter gauge. Now, most table saws that you purchase come with a miter gauge, if you would like to call it that. They are pretty much trash.
You're trash.
So I would suggest, if you want a good one, you don't have to buy this one. This one actually comes with the Harvey table saws. They probably are one of the only companies that come with a really good miter gauge. Otherwise, I would purchase one. I can leave you a link in the description to this one. This one is quite expensive, but they do make some other ones like Incra. I think Craig even has one that are much better than what your factory table saw miter gauge is going to be. These are designed just to simply slide into your miter slot, and this allows you to do your cross cuts. You're able to get very accurate cross cuts with this setup here. You can see, get very accurate, very close to the blade. Now this is completely adjustable. This one actually comes with a longer fence that adjusts to the outside. Also has a stop block here for repeatable cuts with a micro adjustment. So it is expensive, but it is worth the money on this one. All of your miter gauges should have a way for you to release here, and you can cut angles. If I wanted to move this one to 45 and I wanted to cut a 45, has a positive stop, I could then use it to cut a 45 degree there, and you can see it's very accurate right up close to the blade. So definitely invest in a good miter gauge if you're going to do any kind of cross cuts. Sometimes you will have to do them on the table, but most of the time you can do your cross cuts over on the table saw. The miter saw, unless you have a larger piece that won't fit on your miter saw. Now you are limited on the miter gauge as well, because you can't pull it any further back than here. So for instance, for my table saw, I have a 31-inch table here. I believe that's what it is. Yeah, 31 and a half actually. But if you measure from the blade back to my miter gauge, I'm roughly about 14 inches as far as I can come back. There is a little. All right, so I have removed my riving knife. I want to explain to you in a little bit more detail how kickback occurs and why this riving knife is important. So I've removed my riving knife. For the safety folks out there, the table saw is unplugged. We're good to go. All right, so we're going to simulate what we would be doing if we were cutting this board down. I do not have the fence up here, but the same rule would apply, because even if the fence is here, it's not going to stop the kickback. But let's just say we're ripping this board. So you're good to go up until this point. But what happens is, as you get to the back side of the blade, your stock will tend to want to move, even ever so slightly, back and forth. I know this is much exaggerated, but this is what happens. And as you're pushing forward and this tilts just so slightly, those blades are coming up, or the blade is spinning and these teeth are coming up. What happens is it will grab the material and take it and literally sling it back at you. And remember, this blade is spinning at roughly 5,000 or so RPM, so you can see exactly how fast that can happen. Another thing you want to make sure you're doing, even with your riving knife installed, let me install my riving knife here real quick, and you can see obviously how the riving knife will prevent that. All right, so now as you're making that cut, let's go back down. As you're making this cut, even if it happens to want to try to come back on this side, the riving knife is there to keep that from happening. It also serves another purpose too. When you're cutting through a board here, it actually keeps the board split apart. Sometimes when you have wood movement or a lot of stress on the wood, as you go through the cut, the wood wants to try to come back together. So the riving knife also keeps those separated back there, the width of the blade, and allows you to finish the cut. So keep that in mind. Something else is very important when you're talking about this setup here is you always want to make sure that when you are making a cut, you don't want to be directly behind the blade. You want to make sure, it doesn't really matter which side, it's going to depend on the kind of cut you're trying to accomplish, but you want to make sure you're standing to either or side of the blade. Typically, most of the time, I'm standing to my left side and pushing through with either just my hand if it's a large piece, or as I get smaller, using one of the push blocks. What that does is that keeps you out of the way, because these pesky little cuts sometimes, although most of the time they will typically just stay here once you've made the cut and they're not touching the blade any longer. Sometimes the blade spinning, especially when you get just into the smaller pieces, it will catch it just enough to sling it behind you. Now, I don't care how much experience you've got, that can happen. If you'll look just behind me at my garage door, granted, it was a little piece, but that thing happened to me. I mean, luckily, I was standing to the side and it left a nice little hole in my insulation to my garage, or carport door. So anyway, good safety tip. Something else to take into consideration, it's something you just kind of out of habit might want to do, is once you've finished your cut and you've turned your saw off, you might want to reach for that off cut or this cut. You don't want to do that, because even with the more expensive saws, they take a few seconds to actually stop spinning the blade. Wait just a few seconds. There's nothing important enough to risk harming yourself to reach in and try to grab that cut. I'm going to show you an example here real quick how long. I'm not going to time it or anything, but just to show you how long it takes to cut off once I've hit the stop button. Stop. Now, as you can see, that is a pretty good amount of time. The brake will kick in and it will slow it down, but it takes a little bit of time for that blade to completely stop spinning. Another important safety thing I would do actually has nothing to do with parts that come with the saw, but it's actually keeping a tourniquet in your shop, actually multiple tourniquets. I have several in my shop. Basically anything anywhere close to something that could change my life, basically. So please always keep a tourniquet near your bigger saws and stuff that could hurt you. When you're looking for a tourniquet, please, if you guys have been around the channel, you know what I do for a living. I'm actually been a paramedic for many years. Make sure when you are purchasing a tourniquet, you purchase a CAT tourniquet, combat application tourniquet. What you're going to see is, let me get my face out of the way. It is going to be stamped and raised. It says CAT right there. If you're looking on Amazon for a tourniquet, do not purchase one if it's less than $25, because you're not going to find a deal on a real actual tourniquet that's going to be less than that. So absolutely get your tourniquet, several of them, keep them in your shop, could save your life. Okay, that's all I've got for today. I hope you got something out of this. I just wanted to do a beginner's guide to the table saw. I think I want to make this a series, so if there is a tool you have in mind you'd like to learn a little bit more about, as long as I have that tool, I'll see if I can't do that for you. I really appreciate it. We actually have our channel membership open now. You can get some behind the scenes and a few other little perks. That's stuff that's going to evolve as we go forward. There's a link below to join that. I appreciate it, and I will see you in the next video.